It's the third week of Horror Mayhem 2025, Decades of Dread. Hello, welcome to my channel, Another Bibliophile Reads. My name is Greg, and I am a co-host for Horror Mayhem 2025, Decades of Dread. Horror Mayhem is a horror reading event created by Scott and Becky Bryant 3 years ago. It was an event to encourage people to read short works of horror, novels of 250 pages or less, or short stories. Unfortunately, Scott Bryant passed on last year, but his wife, Becky, is continuing the event along with me and a bunch of other co-hosts who like reading horror fiction. And this year, our theme is Decades of Dread, where you try to read horror fiction across the decades. My personal goal is to read a short story from 1850 all the way through the 2020s. And this week, I am doing the 1940s to the 1980s. What stories did I read? This is a vlog-style video because every day I try to read a short story, or at least almost every day, and then record my thoughts on that same day. Alfred Hitchcock presents Stories for Late at Night, an anthology originally published in 1961. These collections of Alfred Hitchcock Presents stories, there are many volumes, a lot of them in mass market paperback, are usually pretty good. They're kind of hard to find at used bookstores nowadays, and they can get a little pricey, unfortunately. I have a number of them, and they're usually fun to dig into. Now, this particular volume I picked up because it contained the novelette The Fly by George Langland, the short story or novelette that the movie The Fly was based off of. It's not quite like the movie, but it is a good short story. Now, I did not read it this week. The story I read this week was Roald Dahl, The Sound Machine. He's a very famous and popular children's book author, but he also wrote suspense and horror stories. And the Sound Machine kind of fits in between that suspense and horror, somewhere where you're not quite sure where it is. There is a man. He lives alone in a house. It's not specified whether it's Britain or England. Roald Dahl is British, so I sort of assume it's Britain, but it could easily just be America. And he's tinkering around in his back shed, working on a machine. And his doctor drops by for a visit. Yeah, doctors dropping by for a visit. That's kind of unusual, but this story was published in 1949. Well, anyway, the doctor asks him what he's doing. And he says, I'm tinkering with sound. There are sound vibrations that cannot be heard by the human ear. And he brings up the example of dogs. Dogs can hear much higher on the sound range than we people can. And the man speculates, what if there is a larger sound range that even dogs can't hear? So he's making this machine that can tune into those sound ranges beyond the human ear, beyond the dog ear. What sounds are there, if any? And this machine does find sounds. Now, the doctor has moved on. He's saying, yeah, man, you go tinker with your machine. But the machine, it does find sounds. And what I expected was something a little bit like H.P. Lovecraft, but this is not an H.P. Lovecraft story. In a Lovecraft story, you can imagine the things that would be making sounds beyond human hearing. But this is Roald Dahl, an author I'm really not familiar with, but I really should be more familiar with his short stories, because this one I found very intriguing, and the end is rather ambiguous, and I always love an ambiguous ending. Death is a Dream by Robert Arthur, originally published in 1957. This short, 10-page story can be either horror or mystery, depending on how you want to interpret it. But what's even more fascinating is that it's told entirely in unattributed dialogue. A style which normally would not work for a story, but I think in this case it works very well. Maybe the style would put some readers off, but I truly enjoyed it. Well, the story has a few characters. There is David Carpenter, his wife, Mrs. Carpenter, and his doctor, Dr. Mason. And Mrs. Carpenter has summoned the doctor because she just recently married David a few days ago, and he's being plagued by terrible, debilitating nightmares. The doctor tells Mrs. Carpenter that when he was young, David had a terrible accident, and he had a schizophrenic break, and he has a dual personality, and his other personality is Richard. While David is under a deep sleep, hypnosis, the doctor is questioning David, saying, "What did you dream?" So then David starts narrating his dream. So you have this story within a story, both stories unattributed dialogue. And the story about David is about his ex-wife, or to say his first wife, who died in a terrible car accident. And he's being plagued with guilt over her death. Unless she's not really dead. As I said, short story, untraditional style, but I really enjoyed it. I really do like these old collections of Alfred Hitchcock Presents. As I said previously, if you see them in a used bookstore, buy them if they're a good price. Foundations of Fear, edited by David G. Hartwell. This is an anthology of horror stories, originally published in 1992. It is pretty dense, it is very thick, and it's a very interesting collection with a lot of diverse authors. My big beef about this book is the print size. It is tiny, and there are a lot of words on each page, which means if I want to read a story out of this book, I need my reading glasses. That's unfortunate. This anthology is also the follow-up to this one. This is The Dark Descent, and this is a 1,000-page anthology, which again, unfortunately, has the small print. But the small print allows the reader to get a lot of good short stories in a collection. Michael K. Vaughan's Sorcerer Roger made me buy this book the other week because I don't have it, and it is a companion piece to this one, and I was reading out of this. I will probably talk about this one later. It may be next year or maybe this year, but a lot of good stories out of this one. But what have I been reading out of Foundations of Fear? I read Longtooth by Edgar Pangborn, originally published in 1969. This is a longish short story for this collection, about 22 pages, which would make it in a regular book, maybe 40 pages, something like that. But there is an older man, he's in his 50s, who inherits a house from his brother who has just died. This house is in rural Maine, and this man goes to live in this house. But he's not quite used to the Maine winters, and his car gets stuck in a snowdrift, and he has to walk to one of his friend's home. And his friend is another man about his age who has married a woman decades younger than himself. So they get talking in this house. They talk about legends of things that are living in the Maine woods, and they hear this thing out in the woods. And this thing breaks in to the second man's home and takes his wife and kills his dog. Now, of course, the local authorities are very skeptical about these two men's stories, about hearing something out in the woods, because they can't track this creature. It's left no traces in the snow. And that is the setup for the story. It was supposed to be as atmospheric as The Willows by Algernon Blackwood. I did not find it that atmospheric, but it does give you a feeling of the Maine woods in winter. And it has a curious ending. I did like it. Duel by Richard Matheson. originally published in 1971. Richard Matheson is one of America's most famous and best science fiction and horror authors. This tale is about a businessman, just called Man, M-A-N-N. He is on a business trip somewhere in California. He is trying to drive home to his house in San Francisco, and he's taking one of the more obscure two-lane routes home. And he pulls in front of a truck driver pulling a gas tank. And this makes the truck driver rather upset. It does not explain why. And they get into this conflict on these rural roads in California. And it becomes a battle of mentality with cars and trucks. Because this truck driver is out to kill the driver, Man. And you don't know why. It's a mystery. What is this truck driver? Is this truck driver even a human being? You won't know, but it is an exciting story. It's a little noisy on my sun deck this afternoon, but this is where I have been doing my reading. I have finished a short story from the horror anthology Stalkers, edited by Ed Gorman and Martin H. Greenburg. It was originally published in 1989. This anthology is supposed to revitalize the stalker genre that the editors claimed was being sort of made silly by stalker horror movies. So all these short stories are about stalkers of one form or another. It includes Dean R. Koontz, when he still had the R in his name, John Coyne, F. Paul Wilson, Robert R. McCammon, Rick Halata, and Rex Miller. And the story I read today was Lizardman by Robert R. McCammon. It is set in the swamps of Florida. There is a 63-year-old man known as Lizardman, and his job is to hunt alligators for their skins. And he's out to get Old Pope. Old Pope is a legendary alligator of enormous size, and Old Pope has supposedly gotten some of his other alligator hunting buddies, killed them, and eaten them. So Lizardman is out to get Old Pope. He is in his fan boat out in the Florida swamps. It is late at night, and he is hunting alligators. He gets a few smaller alligators, but his dreams are for Old Pope. Until Old Pope actually shows up. Now, the end of this story, I thought, was kind of a disappointment. It takes a very odd and strange turn. It is still a horror story, don't get me wrong. I just did not like the turn of events. And also, I'm in favor of the alligators, because I don't think alligators should be hunted for their skins. So I was never a fan of the Lizardman as a character. Now, the author, I think he had a little bit of sympathy for Lizardman. I'm not too sure he'd be opposed to hunting alligators, Robert R. McCammon, but I am. But still, I want to read more stories from this anthology. Those are the stories that I read for week 3 of Horror Mayhem Decades of Dread. Next week, I start with the 1990s, and then I step into the 21st century. I've actually come a long way from 1850 and my Victorian ghost stories written by women writers, and getting very much into the modern era of the horror story. I'm looking forward to the final week 4 and see what I will read. Thank you for watching, and keep on reading.